Mason Queen crossed the threshold of the court with the fixed gaze in the ground, as if stepping on that place was heavier than any military load that had taken in his life. With every step, his boots echoed in the room like drums of memory, and although the police officers at his side maintained the neutral gesture, there was in the atmosphere a tension difficult to ignore. It was not the first time someone like him, a man old, without home and with a coat stained with stories, sat down in that bench of defendants, but it was the first time that the echo of his name generated more than indifference. In the third row, a woman squeezed with force the arms of the seat when heard, "Mason Queen." I knew, not from rumors or police reports, knew of a deeper place, the past. If you shuddered at this point, subscribe, because here we tell stories that deserve to be heard. Olivia Parker, the judge of that day. It was not someone easily impressionable. There was handed down complex sentences, confronted violent criminals, and defended the law even in through threats. But upon receiving the file, your security hesitated. The name Mason Queen was not just a procedure for her. It was a scar. In the folder read details of a minor case. A man accused of loitering near a shopping area, accused of disturbing the public tranquility. But what the folder did not say, and what its heart, yeah, I remembered, it was that same man. It was more than 20 years. There were, loaded to his brother wounded in middle of crossfire in Iraq. Without Mason, Jack would not have returned. Olivia closed the file for a second, swallowed dry, and looked back at the accused. He was no longer an unknown. It was the man who had saved his family. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a young man in a tailored suit and easy smile, stood up with an air of self-sufficiency. With a firm voice and without looking at the accused, he asked for a light sanction, 30 days with prohibition of approaching the commercial area. Presented as a more paperwork, as if Mason were just a number in a long line of routine cases. He didn't mention that Queen's crime had been sleeping in the night's cold next to a kitchen extractor to avoid freezing. He didn't mention that he didn't ask for anything money, nor spoke with nobody. I was just there, seeking warmth. For the prosecutor, it was a hindrance. For the judge, it was something else. While he exposed his request, Olivia kept looking at Mason, as if every wrinkle in his face would tell a story that no one else could see. When arrived the accused's turn to speak, "The judge, you offered the word." Mason hesitated. He swallowed and sat up, with effort. His voice was weak, like that of someone who was carrying a lot without being heard. "I am not asking sorry, your honor. I was just trying keep me hot." The room was left in silence, not because of what he said, but because of how it said, without complaint, no drama. Just a man who had been forgotten by everyone, including the country he served. His calloused hands were trembling slightly, and his military coat was hanging loose on his thin body, as if it no longer had forces to sustain neither not even his past. Some attendees in the room began to murmur. Olivia kept silence for a few more seconds before speaking again, but not did, because at that moment, someone else came in through the door of the background of the court. Alexander Rossi walked with firm step to the front of the room, interrupting the usual rhythm of the procedure. Nobody yet I expected there, not even the judge. She was dressed casually, with a loosely wound scarf and hair slightly disheveled, as if he had arrived running from another life. "I represent Mr. Queen," he announced, showing his lawyer's badge with the left hand, while with the right held a manila envelope. Olivia recognized immediately. He was a public defender with reputation for meddling in cases where no one wanted. But what surprised even more so, what he said after. This man is not just any homeless man. He is a war veteran, and not just any veteran. He is the man who saved Jack Parker in Fallujah. The silence that followed was so heavy that it seemed to envelop the entire room. The mention of Fallujah changed the air. The prosecutor frowned. He frowned, visibly uncomfortable, and the judge intertwined hands on the bench, processing what he had just heard. Rossi continued, "I have here are documents from the Department of Defense, medical records, and testimonies from soldiers who witnessed his rescue. Mason Queen not only fulfilled with his duty, risked his life to get 3 men, including Jack Parker, of the hell." Olivia took the envelope with trembling hands. Nobody knew that Jack was his brother. It was something that had kept outside the hallways judicial, far from their reputation. But there was, in front of her, that man aged, judged to seek warmth in winter. It was the same as there was loaded to his brother in arms, bleeding, dodging shots in half from chaos. What seemed to be a simple audience was now transformed in a moral judgment. And if you're as moved as I am by the story, subscribe. Don't let these stories get lost. The lawyer opened another document. This man never received psychological treatment, never had follow-up of the army, fell in the crack in a system that honors in public but forgets in private. The prosecutor tried to intervene, arguing that what was being judged was a violation of public order, not its past. But Olivia raised the hand, and it stopped without raising his voice. "We are here to apply justice, not to execute it." Blindly, he turned to Mason. "Why that place? Why the kitchen in that mall?" Mason went down the look. "The extractor releases hot air all over the night. I don't have a sleeping bag. I lie down nearby, covered with, in cardboard. When they ask me to move, I move," Rossi reinforced. "Nobody is accused of stealing, harassing, or begging. Just being. And in this city, apparently it is already enough to be considered a crime." Olivia breathed deep, as if every word he heard tore down another layer of distance between his function and its humanity. He remembered Jack, his brother, telling him on a Christmas night as a man with a jacket, bloody there was loaded, his body broken for almost 2 kilometers, under fire enemy to save him, counted always with a mixture of respect and sadness, because he never knew that it was that soldier's aftermath. And now was there, in front of her, without roof, without dignity, about to be punished for seeking warmth. He looked again at Mason, and this time he no longer saw a defendant. He saw the unsung hero of his family, to the man who had made possible that Jack would return. The prosecutor, visibly uncomfortable, tried to recover the control of the judgment, proposing that despite the mitigating circumstances, the grant should be given example so that others would not occupy public spaces as a refuge. It was so when Rossi took one last card. He took out a photograph, old, somewhat faded, and raised it so that everyone they saw in she, a young Mason with a face blackened by smoke and arms tense by the effort, carried a wounded soldier. This image was taken by a war correspondent, and that body that carries is the of the brother of his, Your Honor. The room was left frozen. Olivia didn't say anything at first. She just took the photo with soft hands, and he watched for a long time. In his expression there were no tears but a deep shock, as if the time would have been compressed into that moment. Then he stood up, and with a firm voice he looked at everyone present. "This trial is not about a man without home. It's about what we decide to see when we look at someone so..." The judge asked a 15-minute break. He stood up from the platform without add one more word, and it disappeared after the side door. Inside her office, sitting silently, she held the photo with both hands. It wasn't just a test. It was a crack in his own history, an emotional debt he never knew he had. He remembered how Jack, in his last days of life, mentioned several times to that soldier, "He saved me, Liv. If he you find someday, tell him that thanks is not enough." Jack had died of a cancer aggressive toward 3 years. He never managed to meet again with Mason Queen. But now, Olivia could do something, not as a sister, as a judge. When returned to the room, the atmosphere had changed. Everyone was waiting in silence. Olivia resumed his place and asked Mason to stand. "This court is not going to impose none sanction. What he has experienced is harder than any punishment we could impose, assigned to you. But beyond that, Mr. Queen, I want to ask him apologies." The sentence fell like a stone in the center of the room. Nobody I expected, a female judge. I asked forgiveness. As a city, as a system, as people, we have failed. Not just you, but so many like you. Mason blinked several times. He didn't know that say. He just nodded with a mixture of disbelief and relief. For the first time in many years, someone it had seen. Really seen. Not like a hindrance. Not as a problem, as a human being. If you realize that these stories are necessary in this world, I ask you to subscribe. It's the only way this channel can continue to exist. Alexander Rossi smiled with discretion. I knew that that day would be remembered, not for a legal victory, but for a small historical reparation. In the days following, the story went viral. Media, local and national, they resumed the news. Veteran without home acquitted by judge whose family except in the war. But for Mason, the most important thing was not that, it was Olivia's gesture. A hand extended when least expected. I expected. In the days after the trial, Mason was contacted by several veterans organizations. Some they wanted help him with accommodation. Others you offered medical assistance and psychological follow-up. But what most surprised was receive a handwritten letter. It was from Olivia. In him, he was talking about Jack, about how he never stopped talking about him and how I wanted Mason to know how much had meant his act. The letter didn't ask for anything, it just thanked Mason. Read several times, sitting on a park bench, feeling how something came loose in his chest after years of hardening. He accepted, with a certain reluctance, the proposal for a temporary residence for veterans. At first, you cost adapt. After so much time surviving in the street, sleeping indoors, you generated anxiety. But little by little, with help of the volunteers and the quiet routine of the place, he began to recover pieces of himself, the same one I thought was lost. He didn't speak a lot, but when it did, his voice no longer trembled. He even offered to help in the kitchen, saying that at least he knew how to turn on the ovens, industrialists, thanks to so many nights hiding next to them. Everyone laughed with him for the first time. Mason was starting to come back. Olivia, for her part, was unable to continue as if nothing had happened. Past that one. Judgment, the it, stirred her deeply. In her years as a judge, she had seen it all, but never anything so personal. She decided to take a short leave of absence, not out of weakness, but because she understood that justice also needed human breaks. He visited the center where Mason was staying, not as an authority, but as Jack's sister. They sat on a table in the garden rear, among dried autumn plants. At first, the silence was awkward. Then, Mason spoke first. I thought I would never see her again, Olivia replied, with a smile. I needed see you. That conversation was not long or deep, but it was enough to close a cycle that had been left open for too long. Olivia handed over a small wooden box. Inside, a rusty military badge and a photograph of Jack in uniform, younger, smiling. He kept it all his life. He said that someday it would return. Mason stared at the content as if the time stopped, closed the box carefully and leaned back on his legs. Thank you, he said. Just that, nothing more was needed. In that word fit years of war, abandonment, silence, and finally redemption. For the first time in a lot time, both felt at peace. As the weeks passed, Mason began to give small talks in his same shelter where he lived. They were not grandiloquent speeches, nor emotional lectures. He just sat with other veterans, shared coffee, and told anecdotes of the war. Sometimes he talked about Jack, sometimes about how survive with cardboard and find the exact places where the hot air came out of the buildings. Its way of speaking, slow and unadorned, touched those who they listened. I didn't try, teach nothing, but ended up leaving a mark. Soon, one of the youths from the center, an ex-combatant of barely 30 years, he asked that it will accompany his first date with the psychologist. Mason agreed, no questions asked. Olivia too changed. He began to promote a judicial project called Second Look Court, an initiative to review minor cases of people in homeless situation, seeking not only to apply the law, but to restore the dignity. Each hearing was slower, more human. Not all the judges supported the idea, but she insisted. Mason was invited as an observer at one of those hearings. He did not speak, but his presence was enough. The attendees, they knew who he was, and they knew why he was there. When Olivia finished that session, it looked forthwith. The look. He raised the hand in sign of greeting, without words, and she replied with a slight nod. They had stopped being judge and accused. Now they were something different. Two people united by an act of humanity in half of the system. The story of Mason Queen was not long in coming to be picked up by journalists. At first was an article in a local newspaper, then an interview in national television. But what most moved the country was a short documentary filmed by film students entitled The Man of the Extractor. Mason, was walking around the streets where he had slept, pointing calmly the corners that had been his shelter. There was no drama or victimhood, just the truth. Here happens 3 winters. Nobody saw me, and when they saw me, they crossed the street. His voice was calm, but the impact was immediate. Social networks burst with messages of support and began campaigns, spontaneous donations to shelters. Despite the sudden notoriety, Mason continued being he himself. He turned down offers of money, even a proposal to write a book. "I don't want fame, I just wanted someone to see me." He agreed, however, to volunteer at a veteran support program in homeless situation. Every week, he walked through the neighborhoods where he had previously slept, talking with people who still lived in the weather. He brought coffee, blankets, and above all, his presence. He didn't. It promised magical solutions. It simply said, "I was where you are, and someone helped me out. You are not alone." For many, that was more valuable than any coat. One cold December evening, Mason received a formal invitation from the city council. They wanted to award him a medal for his military service and community service. At first, he hesitated. He never had liked the Acts officers, but Olivia called personally. "It's not because of the medal, Mason. It's for everything you stand for now. There are so many who need to see you there." He finally agreed. The day of the ceremony, went up on stage with the same military coat that there was brought to court, carefully mended by volunteers from the center. The courtroom was full. When mentioned his name, everyone stood up. He was applauded for long minutes. Mason didn't smile, but in his eyes there was something different. Recognition, repair. In his brief speech, he only said, "I didn't fight for a medal, I fought for my teammates. And then I fought for myself. Same. Thanks for watching me now, but don't forget to look at the others." It was direct, without embellishments, as always. When low of the stage, various young people came to hug him. Olivia was among them. She handed him the medal in private, with a phrase that I would never forget. "My brother would be proud of you, and I also, I am." Mason squeezed the medal in his hand, like someone holds something fragile, not because of the object, but because of what it symbolized. At that moment, he understood that he was no longer alone. The city, at last, had remembered. Winter that one passed fast a year, or at least that much you seemed to Mason. For the first time in a lot time, it lived not as a threat, but as just another station. It continued in the residence, but now as a member asset of the team. It helped with logistics, organized the donations, and even cooked hot soup on weekends. He didn't speak a lot, but everyone knew that if they needed anything, they could count on him. He had recovered part of what the time and the indifference you had taken away. Routine, community, meaning. And although continued charging scars, no longer. They weighed so much. Now they were marks of struggle, of survival. One night, sitting in front of the window of his fourth, observed as the snow slowly covered the garden. In his hands, he had the wooden case with the badge and Jack's photo. He opened it once more, as he sometimes did, not out of nostalgia, but out of gratitude. "Thanks, brother," he whispered into the air, not knowing if he was speaking with Jack or with the memory of what they had shared. At that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Closed the box and the left on the table. To the tomorrow next came out early to accompany a new veteran just arrived. The eye expected another day, a story new, because now Mason Queen was no longer alive. In he passed. I was building the future. With he time, some media they tried revive the history, this time with more approaches, commercials, books, series, paid interviews, Mason them. He rejected all with the same phrase: "It's not my story. What matters is what we did with she." She preferred keep low profile, work in silence. He became into a reference figure for many, especially for those who had not yet found his voice. Even some police officers who years ago they had taken them out of the shopping area and began to greet him with respect. One of them, in particular, came over one afternoon with a thermos of coffee. "I'm sorry I didn't see it before," he said. Mason agreed the gesture without resentment. "I knew that true change came not from guilt, but from acts." 1 year after of the trial, Olivia proposed a commemorative plaque in the community center where Mason worked. The phrase he chose was simple: "Here, nobody is invisible." Mason was present at the ceremony, but he didn't go up on stage. He stayed in the back, among the people. He watched as they placed the plate, how some they applauded, and then he left silently, as always did. I didn't need to be in the center. It was enough for him knowing that now others' would be seen. In his absence left something stronger than his presence, the example. Because in the end, Mason Queen wasn't just a veteran, nor a media case. It was a reminder living that seeing the other truly can change everything. You can't imagine how much you help us. When you subscribe, this channel lives off of that, of those who value stories like this. Years later, a young woman law student who had been in that audience as an intern wrote an essay entitled "Justice That Listens." And he said as that day changed his vision of the right, he mentioned the Judge Parker to Attorney Rossi, but above all to Mason Queen, the man who had transformed a cold courtroom into a space of humanity. That rehearsal won a national award and was read in several universities. Mason learned from a newspaper clipping that someone left it on his bed, read without comments. But he kept it next to Olivia's letter and Jack's photo. When Mason died, some years later, he was buried with honors in a veterans cemetery. To his burial attended ex-combatants, volunteers, judges, students, and even people without home that it had known. There were no grand speeches, just a flag folded with care and a deep silence, full of gratitude. Olivia was there, standing with hands crossed in front of him. When he placed a small note on the tombstone: "Thank you for saving us, all of us." Mason did not leave heirs, nor fortune, nor properties, but he left something much more valuable, the proof that a single act of justice can break the cycle of forgetting. Your name was left recorded in stone, yes, but long before that, it had already been done, recorded in the memory of all those who learned to look differently thanks to him. From his legacy, the Second Look Court expanded to other cities. It became in a restorative justice model, where listening was done before judging, where each case was seen as a story, not a number. At each location, there was a discreet photo of Mason Queen with the legend, "He taught us to look." Many did not know his full story, but it was enough with knowing that he existed, that he walked through those same streets, and that a day was seen at lastly as a human being. That image was enough to change the way they started the audiences. It was enough to change the law. And so, what began as a minor trial for occupying a public space ended up opening a space much larger, one of dignity, memory, and compassion. Mason Queen, the man who once trembled under a kitchen extractor to survive the cold, became as a symbol of a justice that not only punishes, but also recognizes. His history was not a miracle, It was a chain of human, real, brave decisions, and in a world that forgets with ease your name, it remained as a beacon, not to be admired but to be remembered by everyone, especially those who they pass sentences that no one should be left behind. If this story touched you, subscribe now. That's all I ask, so I can continue telling stories the world shouldn't forget. Really, your subscription brand the difference.